Ladies and gentlemen, many questions come my way since the beginning of this journey about my credentials. And really, credentials for what I do are really irrelevant, because everything I show you is a graph, a chart, numbers, and the conclusions are just based upon science. If a monkey handed you a briefcase with $1 million in it, that $1 million doesn't become more valuable if somebody with a suit and tie hands it to you. If a messenger delivers a letter from your neighbor and from across the street, that person who delivers the letter, no matter what their credentials are, does not change the content of the letter. But it's with great pride and honor that I talk about my family heritage and lineage, because it does pertain to some of the theories and conclusions we put forth. Nothing we put forth is blind or arbitrary. It's all based upon factual data and data sets. But I want you to know that one of my forefathers, a great-great-grandfather, and even his father, are one of the most quoted mathematicians in the annals of mathematics and the genealogy of mathematics. My forefather did more to advance the science of physics long before Einstein, long before Oppenheimer, long before those guys, Fermi, long before many of those people. He influenced Tesla. Tesla influenced him, but in very indirect ways, which I can't go into because of the length of this video. My forefather, my great-great-grandfather, had so many accolades I can't mention them, and even his father. And his father taught physics at Harvard, and in that class, my great-great-grandfather had a classmate. His name was Percival Lowell. And Percival was known to contest just about every theory put forth in that class. Because remember, back in the mid-1800s to the late 1800s, physics had not advanced yet to the level that it needed to. And he really was the person who pushed physics into a more mathematical realm. He won a scholarship over to Berlin, attended one of the universities there to get his PhD in physics. And of course, during that time, the leading physicists in the world resided in Germany. He taught at Harvard. He was a professor at Harvard. He was, get this, a co-author of the very first book about calculus. He actually constructed a list of theorems and integrals, is what he called them, to assist people in trigonometry and calculus. And those integrals were applicable in physics. At the time he returned from Germany with his PhD to teach at Harvard, there was no math and physics at that time. Most of physics dealt with mechanical descriptions and mechanical demonstrations, but it was hard to quantify and predict anything in the realm of physics because math had not become intertwined with physics as of yet, but he made sure that changed. he founded the American Physical Society, which is a physics society. It has changed its name, and still today it's the second largest physics association on the planet. Yes, my forefather founded the American Physical Society, or I could say co-founder. He also was president. He was inducted into the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he was inducted into very exclusive realms of mathematicians and for Palermo and physicists in France, and the list goes on and on. And yes, we even have a crater on the moon was named after us. So the whole genealogy of my family, the whole lineage, has nothing to do but physics and science. And it's quoted at my great-great-grandfather's funeral that in the annals of mathematics there is no person quoted or referenced further than these, my great-great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather. There was even a cousin to my great-great-grandfather. He was a great-great-cousin, of course, and he was one of the most influential philosophers of our time, one of the greatest thinkers of that time. He influenced people like Dewey and James and Holmes, Oliver Wendell Holmes, not Junior, but the senior. And amazingly enough, there's a church that's founded after Oliver Wendell Holmes, and when you read the books, and when you read the poetry, and when you read the lectures, and when you listen to a sermon given by the minister at this church, you will hear my ancestor quoted almost every time. Oliver Wendell Holmes quoted him, but most people are quoting Holmes instead, and the originator of some of those quotes was an ancestor of mine. And like I said, my middle name is Lowell. So, yeah, I was named after Percival. So it's just no wonder when I look at what my interests are today, it's no wonder when I see who I descended from. I have this tremendous love and respect for the ocean. I have an ocean-going vessel. I used to go deep sea fishing, snorkeling. I never did use a tank. I always snorkeled because I could hold my breath as longer than anybody I've ever met. And my love of the ocean stemmed from my great-great-great-grandfather, who eventually got out of teaching and bought himself a merchant sea vessel and was a merchant sailor and sailed up and down the East Coast and even over to Africa at times, South Africa. So it's no wonder what has driven me is to leave a legacy that is just can barely measure up to my forefathers. But when I look at what we've uncovered, what we discovered, what we predicted, I think we accomplished that goal. The issue is that I remained anonymous on YouTube, and therefore my accomplishments may never fall into the family genealogy and lineage. But we're proud of so many things that the channel was able to discover and predict. One of the things that we discovered was that the Great Basin was a super mega caldera. It was a massive lava dome that fed, not a lava dome, but a lava chamber that fed Long Valley, Inyo Crater, the Owens Crater. Those are all in California. The Cascade volcanic fields, the whole Great Basin is just nothing but lined with calderas and supervolcanoes. Due to the rotation around the Colorado Plateau, some of those supervolcanoes have rotated out of the Great Basin, like Yellowstone, and like the supervolcanoes found in Colorado and New Mexico. So there's so much volcanism surrounding the Great Basin, it's not even funny. So a year and a half after we said the Great Basin was a super mega caldera, one of the largest lava chambers on land in the world, the scientists announced they discovered an ocean of liquid carbon underneath the Great Basin, with arms and extensions leading up into the Cascade Range, up into Wyoming, and up into and over to New Mexico. So it just basically validated what we had theorized. So I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am of the fact that Karen and I actually discovered that the Great Basin was a super mega caldera, and we discovered it, one, because we looked at all the super volcanoes that ringed it and all the volcanism that ringed the Great Basin, and we drove through there, and the geology was so obvious. I mean, Washoe Valley is a massive 1.5 mile caldera surrounded by nothing but volcanism. So it's very, very obvious. And those surveys, those underground surveys, returned liquid carbon. So that means it's molten. Now, the other things that we've done is taught people how to predict earthquakes months in advance. We had predicted dozens and dozens and dozens of solar flares within very narrow time frames. Every single prediction came true. I mean, I just can't be more proud. And a lot of it was because of the educational background, that we could arrive at those conclusions. But once vindicated, it's like, again, you open up the briefcase, there's $1 million in it. Who cares who brought you the briefcase? At that point in time, when we get vindicated, it doesn't matter how educated I am or not. Vindication is vindication. We are the only channel on YouTube to explain the massive and sudden death of starfish, as the tidal pools were just getting way too hot. We're one of the only YouTube channels that identified the bleaching agent for coral as being ultraviolet, and that has just been confirmed by an expert who just chimed in. We're going to go back and try to find his comment so we can interview him. This guy's amazing. Tells you exactly how and why the coral bleach. It has nothing to do with the warmth of the water, has more to do with ultraviolet light. Amazing, hey? We were one of the first channels, if not the only channel, to point out how moisture was crossing the equator and being transported to the Arctic in a river of warm water, and then conversely, Arctic air being transported back down towards the equator. And then that was confirmed, and 6 months later, when scientists were concerned about exactly that very phenomenon. We were the only YouTube channel to explain away the supermoons. We didn't explain them away, but we explained them as the moon becoming more elliptical in its orbit. And I mean, that was a no-brainer. Of course, we received criticism for that, but then it came out in a couple science articles in the journals that the moon, in fact, had become more elliptical, and they were looking for reasons. One of the reasons were listed was a bogus reason. They called it secular changes. We were the channel that actually pointed the exact location of Planet X, and within 2 years after we pinpointed that exact location, NASA came out with a press conference saying they found a brown dwarf in the constellation Aquarius, and they placed it almost like pin the tail on the donkey kind of a thing, right where we placed our brown dwarf. Big difference is they said it was 40 light years and we said it was 40 AU. Big difference in terms of distance from the sun. So I feel like I've left the legacy, but it's all been under an anonymous individual. So eventually we're going to have to reveal my identity, and we're going to be doing that on the Patreon channel. My grandfather taught physics and chemistry at Stanford University, so he was no slouch. My father was a PhD geologist, one of the most quoted people with respect to certain landform in the United States. And actually, some of his theories I've actually contradicted, with the theory of subsidence, and that the origin of planet Earth was a collision orientation and beginning and nothing else. That would explain just about everything we see on planet Earth and in our solar system. We were the only channel and the only people so far that I know of that explains the sunspot cycle and explains what sunspots are. Sunspots are highly magnetic regions. Some have positive and some have negative orientation. And when the positive meet the negative, watch out. And we describe those as being iron asteroids, which would make sense because every 11 years, guess where Jupiter ends up? In the constellation Aquarius, where this brown dwarf comes from. So it makes perfect sense that Jupiter's going to be slinging lots of debris into our solar system, and hence into our sun. And to this day, nobody's been able to disprove that. In fact, it explains everything about sunspots. It explains the cycle, it explains the magnetism, it explains everything. It explains why they degrade, it explains their lifespans.